Now in SQL Server 2005, Microsoft has divided security into really 3 different levels to try to make it a little easier for the administrators to get their head around. Let's look at the terminology here and get used to this because you're going to hear it a lot in the coming months and years in SQL Server. We're now going to deal with principals, securables, and permissions. And by separating these into these 3 levels, it makes it easier for you to visualize exactly how security should be constructed and managed. So let's jump in first and talk about what exactly are principals. Well, a principal, simple definition, anything or anybody that can be given permission to access something. Okay, now that breaks down into 2 different types. There are indivisible principals, and those are like single identities, like a logon. A login that I created in an earlier video for Frank. That's an indivisible principal. A collection of principal or collection principals, if you will, these are things like fixed server roles, anything that contains more than one principal that can contain permissions. So any kind of a group type situation is technically a collection principal. So you may hear some of that or you may read some of that in documentation out there. That's exactly what they're talking about. Well, there are 3 levels of principals that you need to be aware of in SQL Server. The first one is Windows level principals. The next one are SQL Server level principals, and this gets back to the logins, the authentication modes. Remember, the Windows authentication mode, those users that are being mapped in, and SQL Server logins. And then, of course, our database users. So again, this ties directly back into Windows authentication or the authentication modes. Well, let's look at these 3 levels. At the Windows level of principals, we have local user accounts, domain user accounts, and then, of course, our Windows groups and Active Directory. And since we can map any of those into SQL Server, then we can deal with those as principals. They get permissions. The second one, SQL Server, we only have 2 here. We have SQL Server logins and SQL Server roles. Then, inside each individual database on every SQL Server, we have the database user, we have database roles, database groups, and application roles. So those are the 4 types of users that can be inside a database, and obviously we can set up security on each one of those. Now you do need to be aware that the database groups right here are really provided for backward access or backward compatibility. And Microsoft's going to suggest that you use database roles now to collect your principals at the database level. Don't use database groups. They're going to stop supporting those in future versions. So those are principals. So first step on security is, number 1, determining who needs to have security applied to them. Who needs any kind of permissions? Those are our principals.